This is Product Management, the podcast powered by Alpha. Welcome. We feature the brightest minds across the numerous disciplines that fuel modern product teams. Join over 15,000 weekly listeners to learn from product leaders, authors, and founders from companies such as Adobe, Shopify, Viacom, Under Armour, and many more. They'll share their insights and best practices for experimentation, user research, leadership, corporate innovation, and more. To receive updates on the latest episodes of this show, subscribe to our weekly newsletter at thisisproductmanagement.com. To learn more about Alpha, the platform that has powered thousands of product experiments for the world's leading brands, visit alphahq.com.
Hey, I'm your host, Mike Fishbein. Welcome back. On this episode, I'll be speaking with Holly Hester-Reilly, product consultant and former product owner at Shutterstock. She'll share how she identifies what assumptions to test and how she reports the results of experimentation to internal stakeholders.
My name is Holly Hester-Reilly, and I'm a product management consultant and trainer. I started my company, H2R Product Science, earlier this year in January. Prior to that, I worked at Shutterstock for a little over a year and a half, and before that, I was at MediaMath. Both of them are really high-growth tech companies, so I've seen a lot of companies scale and have done product management in those. And prior to that, I was at pre-funding startups. So bootstrap startup of my own that I was a part of the initial team for, and then a small company that I was hire number 4. So been in the tech scene in New York for about a decade. High-impact experimentation is product management.
Holly has experience running experiments to make key product decisions as a product leader at Shutterstock and as a consultant to companies including Toys R Us and Weight Watchers. I can't wait to hear her war stories and advice, but first I asked her how she got started as a product manager.
When I went to college, I actually studied chemical engineering, and I thought that I was going to build chemical-based products that, in my mind, were going to be good things for the world that would help people maybe with medical supplies or things like that. And I went to grad school in chemical engineering. And as I pursued the discipline of chemical engineering, I thought that I wanted to become a professor, and I did lab research. And I wanted to teach and go that route. And so I was going down that path. I was in a PhD program for chemical engineering, and I learned more and more about academia. And then I sort of said, I don't think that's the right place for me. So at the same time that I was in grad school, my husband, who's a software engineer, had founded a startup. The year was 2007. He was highly influenced by Paul Graham and all of his writings, and said, we're going to go full force at this. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to, really commit. And he had a team of people who were willing to do that with him. And they founded Toonarchy in 2007. At first, I was still in grad school, and I was kind of watching what they were doing. And then I started thinking, maybe I'll check that out. Maybe I can help out somehow. And I, went to some tech events in the city, and I joined some of their meetings. And then slowly I started to fall in love with that and realized that the tech industry was full of people who were so much more energetic and excited than what I was encountering in academia. So that's how I moved over into tech, and just kind of early stage bootstrap startup, you do anything you can. So I did finance, I did legal, I did project management, I did user research. I remember drafting a user survey and going to New York Comic-Con and finding people and accosting them and being like, will you fill this out for us? We didn't have much to give them, but we tried. There's lots of free things you can get there and then hand to other people. And they give out lots of free hugs at Comic-Con, so there was that. We did that. We took it back and looked at, it was early in the days of smartphones. So I remember that was one of the things was we were considering, is this only Toonarchy was a web application for creating web comics. And we were interested in figuring out, does it need to be a mobile application too? Because the iPhone had just launched. That was sort of my early experience in that. And I loved it so much, I decided, even though Toonarchy didn't work out, that I wanted to go and move into that full time. So I went over to a company called Rip Road. I did that for 2 years. We launched a platform for mobile health. And I had actually looked at what they were doing and made the recommendation for them to build their own platform in-house to support what their clients were asking for. From there, I went to MediaMath in 2010, and they were a small company, about 140 people at the time, but they were growing over 100% year-over-year growth rate. And It was an ad tech, which moves so fast and is very complex. That was really appealing to me. So I joined them. I was there for 3 years, and I got to do a lot of really interesting things and be on the ground with engineers and a big engineering team, shipping software and talking to users and looking at how we could make the experience better for the people who were hands-on keyboard every day on our platform. And from there, I went to Shutterstock. And so I joined Shutterstock, and the first thing I did there was Skillfeed. Skillfeed was a business unit at Shutterstock that had been struggling. It was making $1 million or so revenue a year, but they were putting a lot into marketing, and they wanted to know, is there a real growth opportunity here? And I had the wonderful opportunity to just spend a lot of time doing an analysis of that, talking to the customers, talking to the contributors who created the videos, looking at the data and figuring out what that looked like. And I made a case for them to shut down the whole business unit. Once we made that decision, I moved on to Shutterstock Editor, which was a very exciting project for them. They were launching their first new product that wasn't about asset delivery. So that was a really new thing for them. And I helped them take that from prototype to launch and then build a roadmap for a couple of years out. So since then, I did a couple other projects at Shutterstock, and then I left in January to start my own consulting company. I've been working with clients like Toys R Us and Weight Watchers, as well as startups who are in their early stages trying to figure out, we have this idea, which target market are we really going to go after for this? Where's the money going to be? What do we need to build? And for the big companies, I do the same thing. It's just that they're doing it with a whole lot more resources behind it.
After a PhD program in chemical engineering, Holly found herself running user surveys at Comic-Con while working as a product manager at an early-stage startup. She later joined Shutterstock, where she worked on Skillfeed, a new business unit that was generating about $1 million in annual revenue. Holly now runs her own consulting company, where she advises both startups and large companies. I asked Holly what makes an experiment high impact.
So in my mind, high-impact experimentation is about not just going out and talking to customers or looking at data, but doing it to answer the biggest questions. Well, I talk to users, so I must be doing this right. And I'm so excited that they're talking to users because that is a fantastic first step. But even more impactful if you can answer the risky questions, so you can drive down the risk for your project through this research. So I really advocate for my teams to think about, why are you going to do that research and how do you get the answers to the questions that you really need to answer? I would say there's kind of two classes of situations that I see that I run experiments in. One class is a client or, a team that I'm working with has an idea already they feel pretty strongly about, and they want to refine it. And in that case, what I'm looking to do is to help them craft experimentation that's going to help get the biggest bang for the buck and make sure that that product can really be optimized, or figure out if perhaps they are misguided and it is not the right product. In that case, I see it mostly as experimentation around the solution. Is this the right solution for what they're doing? Unless they skipped over the step where you figure out if you're solving a real problem. If they did skip over that step or didn't do enough of that, if that tends to come out in the conversations around the solution. And so sometimes it will happen where a team will bring me in, or I'll be, assigned to a project, and we think that's the stage we're in, and we think that we're trying to, do research around whether this is the right design for something. And then we start to kind of notice some cracks at the edges. That's when things will shift into another area, which is really a more initial stage research set, where we're trying to say, is there a valuable problem to solve here? Is there a real market demand for this? Is there an unmet need that we're hitting? And will people pay money for a solution to this? And what are the parameters, or what are the constraints around their needs for it? So that is the other area. And that's actually the area that I tend to spend even more of my time, because that's the place where we get the biggest returns. Because if we can find something that a company I'm working with has a strategic advantage to do, and they haven't, nobody's really doing that yet, but they have a good reason that they're the ones that should do it, then we can usually create the high growth products, the ones that do 10x in usage in a year, because those are the ones where it's like, wow, that was a real unmet need, not just an optimization.
High impact experimentation prioritizes and answers the most important questions teams have in order to reduce the risk of failure and build a better product. How does she know what assumptions need to be tested in the first place?
I have a heuristic that I like to apply for whether an assumption needs to be tested. And that is, what would the cost be if you got this wrong? We don't actually need to test everything. We need to test the things that are risky. And the way that I have learned to define risk from some really great smart people in the field like Jeff Patton and Marty Kagan is to map out impact versus likelihood. So what I like to do is I ask a team to go through an exercise where we do a risk assessment, and I say, okay, everybody, it's basically like a pre-mortem. We brainstorm, what are the ways that this could go wrong? What are the ways that it could go wrong, either because there wasn't a real market need for it. So I think of that as the value reason. So there's not enough value here. There's not enough reason someone would want to do this. What are the ways that could go wrong in that sense? Another set is the usable way. So what are ways this could go wrong? Because even though there was a market need, our solution is not usable and therefore it still fails. And what are the ways it could go wrong on the feasibility spectrum? So, there's a real market need, there's a potential for a usable solution, but maybe this goes wrong because we fail to actually engineer and deliver it. Our solution has too many bugs or costs too much to run or things like that. So I actually ask my teams to think about in those three areas ways things would go wrong and then map them using sticky notes out on a canvas or a whiteboard. On one axis is likelihood and the other axis is impact. So then we get 4 quadrants. And of course, the quadrant that we care the most about is the one where you have a high likelihood of happening and a high impact if that goes wrong. So an example from my past is one of my clients was investigating whether they might want to build a recommendation system that would essentially create a personal assistant for users of their product. And of course, a recommendation system in the abstract is great. If you imagine, okay, I go to some product and it gives me a recommendation and it's what I wanted, that's really good. But it has to actually do that, right? It can't be recommendation if you don't eat fish and you go to a site for meals and it says, here's 5 fish meals. You're going to be like, what? That's so wrong. I don't want that at all. And then you're going to not bother to try again. So having them walk through, one possibility here is that we actually aren't able to serve up useful recommendations. And what is the technical risk of that happening? Because that's a very technical problem. Another possibility is nobody actually wants recommendations on what kind of meal to eat for dinner tonight or something. So if they walk through each of those, we can see which ones are high likelihood and high impact. And then those are the ones that we craft our research around. So on the other side, things that we don't need to test would be things where it's either low likelihood or low impact or both. So an example of that for me is often the areas of a product or project that are really well known. So the places where there are 100 ways that people do this on the internet today, everybody is really used to the way that Apple does it, or maybe it's a checkout flow or, a save for later experience or a new member sign up. Some of those things, there's just so many great examples, and you can kind of go to who are the market leaders and how are they doing it. And if you have a good reason to believe that there's a lot of similarities between your users and theirs, then you may not need to test some of the elements of those things as much. And you can put them through A/B testing and optimize, but you don't need to create these huge plans with quantitative and qualitative sides to it.
Holly asks herself an important question before deciding to run an experiment. What would the cost be if you got this wrong? We don't need to test everything. We need to test the things that are risky, she says. I asked Holly what she does once she's identified a high-impact, high-likelihood assumption.
Once you've identified something that you think is high risk, that has high likelihood of happening and high impact if it happens, the first step that I like to have my team start with is just to brainstorm a list of questions. What do we wish we knew about this? What would it mean for this to happen? So if we go to my example of a recommendation engine for food, start thinking about specific ways that we could learn more about this. So, okay, do people want food recommendations? How picky are people? How many people don't eat any fish? What are they doing today? Let's get some data on how many solutions that are out there today are being used and who's using them and what are the demographics of the people using them. So I generally have the team collaboratively create a big list of questions, and then we kind of prioritize the questions. Well, which ones of these questions are things that we think it would be really valuable to know the answer to? If you were doing, recommendations for what to eat for dinner tonight, you would probably want to first try to get a better understanding of how many people actually struggle with that. How much time are they spending thinking about what to do for dinner? Do they like doing that? Do they dread thinking about it every night? Do they think about it all day long and enjoy it? Or do they get home like I do at dinner time and go, oh crap, what are we doing this time? And then do the same thing again like it's Groundhog Day every day. If you could start to understand what those parameters are like, and then you can craft a plan to start to answer whatever are the biggest questions that are going to help you size up that market, start to understand more of the ethnographic side of it, or if it's something where there's a really big technical risk, you may, at this point, also start to ask your engineers to help. So that's one thing I think I haven't mentioned yet is when I do this kind of exercise, I love for it to have a product manager, a designer, an engineer, and any stakeholders, maybe a merchandiser or a business manager or a marketing person, whoever knows things about this, all there. Sometimes I think we have these conversations with just the product people or just the product and design people. But I think if you bring in, at least your leadership of engineering as well, they're going to help you think through things that could be very risky on the technical side, and it's going to help them get an earlier understanding of what you're worried about on the business side.
Holly starts by bringing her team and all knowledgeable stakeholders together to brainstorm a list of questions that they need to answer. I asked her to share her experience at Shutterstock, gaining user insights that were surprising.
One of the times when I learned something surprising to me was actually when I was doing the research for SkillFeed, which was the business unit that we ended up closing. And the thing that actually was surprising to me was we had a sense that this business wasn't doing what we wanted it to do, but we also had some very active users. So there were, some high frequency users, and I needed to understand more about what that was to make sure that we weren't prematurely closing off something. So to me, one of the things that was really surprising there was talking to those users, seeing how frequently some people did use the site. I mean, examples of some users in other continents of the world who spent 100 hours in a month watching videos on SkillFeed. And I looked at that and I just thought, wow, what is driving these people and who's doing that? But so then we went and talked to some of them because that's what we do. We find out where there are places where the data does something surprising and you didn't expect to see that. It's great to go and talk to them and find out what's going on. And so we did. And, in many cases, those were people who were just so hungry for new opportunities that they were trying to get information and learn any way they could. And this happened to be the platform that fell into their lap and fit their needs for that. And that was actually surprising to us to learn about those people and find out what drove them. So we did explore that for a little while and try and see, are there enough people like that? Could we grow this part of it? I think whenever I do help a team run some kind of research or experimentation, we're always looking for really strong points and really weak points and trying to understand both sides better.
Holly encourages product managers to dig deeper after learning something surprising. How does she determine what kind of experiment to run, given the question she's trying to answer?
There's a lot of different ways to do research. And so there's also a skill in figuring out what kind of research method is the right one for a given situation. So there's looking at things you've already got in-house. There's looking at data that exists today. There's generating new things. You might partner with a data analyst to dive into existing information in a way that hasn't been done before, or you might go out and run your own surveys or talk to users, or you might put data tagging into your product in a way that it hadn't been before so that you can learn things that you weren't learning in the past. All of those are things you might do, and there's a lot of fantastic tools out there to do it. A lot of people that I talk to are so used to doing it through departments of their company that they don't really think about other ways. So I'll give you one example is I was talking to a product manager at Babies R Us about validating what they thought they knew about expectant moms who are getting ready to register for their baby registry. And she asked me how we could answer some of these questions that we had talked about. And I said, expectant moms are spending so much time on the internet. I've been an expectant mom before. I often have found that's a time in your life when you just want to connect with other people who are going through the same thing. And one of the best ways to do it is to go online and talk to them. And so there's these vibrant communities, whether it's Baby Center or, another site, Facebook, where these people are already talking. So just go where they already are and read what they're writing because they're writing it out in the open and in public. And you can go and see, hey, how many conversations are they having about where are you registering or what's on your mind when you decide where to register? Maybe these things are out there in ways that sometimes in the more traditional companies, people aren't used to thinking about. That was a helpful thing. We were able to gather some interesting information from just going and looking online in existing places.
From analyzing existing user data to running surveys to prototyping, there are a number of ways to gain user insights. How does Holly analyze the results after running an experiment?
The biggest thing that I come across is if the results show a wide variety of responses, if you feel like there's inconsistency or users all want different things, that's a place where usually to me that means that we're not being tight enough in our segments. It's not uncommon to have a conversation where, someone's like, well, there's this big spread and here's the average, and I guess we're just going to build for the average. And I usually look at that and I say, well, that's probably not going to be as effective as if we understand which segments have differences so I love Jeff Patton has a saying that what are the differences that make a difference? I like to use that when I'm planning, who's involved in research or how we understand the results of research. If we have some very wide range of answers, then we start to look at, well, where do things cluster together and where do they just stay scattered? And can we start to understand if that clustering has differences that make a difference in how the user would use your product under the hood? And then you can start to say, okay, for future stuff, we're going to keep that in mind. If we do this at an early stage and now we're going to go and design a solution, well, maybe from that stage we learned more about who we should be targeting, and then we test our solution with those people more heavily than we test it with others. It makes it a lot easier to design compelling product if you have more understanding of needs in the people you're designing for. One time we were doing usability testing on feature for Shutterstock Editor that we were getting ready to launch. And we had been working on adding text to Shutterstock Editor for a while, and we had worked on marketing behind the launch and everything. So it wasn't just one of these releases where it was, every 2 weeks we roll something out or every day we roll something out. This was one where we were specifically going to hold up the actual release to customers for a marketing event. And as we were preparing for it, once the software was functioning in our QA environment, we said, okay, we're going to do some testing with users again. We tested the prototypes, but let's test the real thing. We put it in front of users, and we watched several of them use it, and we realized that it needed more. I'm a huge advocate of lean, and so I always say, try and see what's the smallest minimum amount you can release that is going to be useful for people. So even though one could imagine a text feature that has a lot of font and bold and italic and colors and left justification and right justification and center justification, we were getting ready to launch one that was just sort of a basic minimum that would be what people needed to add text to a social media image. So it had fonts and color, and I don't even remember if it had left and right justification, it had centering, but it didn't have shadows and outline. And we realized that when we put it in front of people and we watched them use it, we realized that was actually a big problem because we were doing text on top of images. And a lot of times our customers would add an outline or a shadow to make the text readable on the various colors that were in the image. So it might have been fine if we were doing Evite or something and it was always on a solid color background because we were doing an invitation. But because our product was all about putting text on top of an image, it needed to have that additional feature to make sure that you could read that text on top of the image. And we had hypothesized that we could add that later. And as we watched users, we said, no, we're going to need to put that in before we launch this.
Know when to dig deeper and when to actually change the product. If there's inconsistency, tighten your segments instead of building for the average, Holly argues. I asked her to walk through an experiment she's run in the past that helped her make a critical product decision.
I was super fortunate to be able to really do this sort of soup to nuts for Shutterstock Editor. I joined the Shutterstock Editor team prior to launch when they had a prototype and they were a very small team. And they had a really big vision. And I loved the vision. I joined the team, I was already at Shutterstock, but I moved over to that team largely because that vision was compelling to me. And that vision was they would make it really easy for non-professionals to create professional-looking graphic design. I totally empathized that there was a real pain there. A lot of people were having to do this, especially, the social media managers who are posting these images every day and, they need it to crop right and have the right filters and do these things, but they don't really want to open Photoshop every time and they didn't go to graphic design school. So I joined that team and they had a lot of great things going, but there were a lot of risks because they wanted to, you can imagine, so that's a big vision, right? Like make it easy for non-professionals to do this. They needed some help figuring out how to focus and how to get a path from, a minimum viable product to a market-ready product to a market-winning product and something that people would be happy to use. I started off by running a workshop with them, and we walked through what do we know about the outcomes that people were trying to achieve when they needed to create a new design, when they were using Shutterstock images to do it. And then I helped them with the knowledge that they already had sort of hone in and say, of all the outcomes that we want to support, which ones are the most achievable for us to do soon? So which ones don't require as much technical work to get out the door? and would still be usable and would still be valuable. And so from there, we were able to hone down and say our MVP is going to be creating social media images, because we actually had talked to a lot of users who they needed to crop photos so that when it was put in like a Facebook stream or a Twitter stream and it auto cropped, it didn't show like the person's bottom instead of their face or things like that. Or they needed to crop them to put them in their special blog size. So we started with that because those people were opening this complex software just to crop an image. And then we said, okay, and then we're going to add text because people, post to Twitter with a text over an image and that's it. And so we can meet real use cases along the way. And throughout the whole process, every time that we were doing it, we did what we could to understand more about who are these people, how many of them are there, how deep is this need, how much time are they spending. Like I can tell you that the average social media manager was spending 1 to 2 hours a day with something related to graphic design. And most of them told us that they didn't love that part of their jobs. Sometimes that was hard. Shutterstock had traditionally worked with people who loved graphic design. And now we're trying to meet the needs of customers who actually just kind of see it as a nuisance along the way to something else they're doing. There was a whole learning element to that. And we needed to gather data. We ran surveys. We looked at data on the site. We talked to customers. And we did all these things continuously, a little bit every week, a little bit every day, a little bit every week, while the team was building, while the team was designing. And that was able to support us so that we were able to have a small MVP and get it out the door in the time that the company wanted and have those users that we were targeting be very happy with it. My definition of a successful product launch is you put it out the door and the people that you thought were going to love what you're doing, and they ask you for more. And then the thing they ask you for more for is the thing you thought they were going to want next. That, to me, is the most successful launch. If they're just really happy and they're not like, and now where's this? Then you probably waited too long. That's what happened here. We put it out the door. We didn't have text yet. It was just cropping and filters. The social media managers started coming back regularly, using it to crop, and they said, when can we add text? And we were like, that's what we're working on. And so that was able to lead us into the next phase and start developing everything. And today, it's been over a year later, Shutterstock Editor has 10 times as many active users, and they offer text and cropping and logos, multiple images and alignment and shapes and all sorts of things that the team has really taken it from where it was when I was on the team.
Holly's meticulous experimentation helped her validate a problem for a target customer group and develop solutions with real use cases for those customers. I asked her how she reports results to internal stakeholders to get alignment on key decisions.
I'm really fortunate to have gotten to learn from some great people for that. So Catherine Ulrich, who was the chief product officer at Shutterstock while I was there, really helped with some of that, setting the expectations and helping us provide air cover, as they say, for doing the learning. But what I did was make sure to share the learnings frequently so that it would be a little bit at a time. I would say in the beginning, there wasn't necessarily as much support for why does Holly want to go out and have the team do these things? We know what we want to build. And I would sort of say, okay, well, you're right. And we're going to build. And look, this team is building over here and that's all happening. But I've got what I need to do this with. It doesn't take that much resources or that much time. Let me go and run that and we'll see what we learn. And then I would go and do a small, we ran a survey, intercept survey on the site whenever someone went to download an image and ask them, well, what are you going to use this image for? So it was this is a small ask. I'm just asking, put this one question on the site and see what happens. And then we started to say, okay, here's the results. And did we learn something from this? And, oh, yes, we did. Okay, so let's ask the next question. And so kind of walking them through, it's a little easier than saying, here's a really big ask up front. I want you guys to let me do this huge study. So that's one thing that really helped, is to do it, a little bit at a time. And I think that also really helps because it's more sustainable, it's more manageable. And then to share back the results. Most teams have a sprint demo where they share what they're doing in their engineering side, shows what they built. And I started using that to also share what we learned and to share how that changed our plan. And then depending on the stakeholders, we had a separate one with some of the higher level, more invested stakeholders, where it was a place where they could feel comfortable asking what they had and would share the same things with them, but maybe on a different cadence. Each time that we would go to one of those meetings and say, okay, here's an update for our roadmap, and they're asking mostly about progress, but we're saying, well, here's what we learned. And even if they hadn't asked for us to answer those questions, once we put up what we learned, they would engage with it and start to realize that we were learning valuable things. And then it would make them think, and the next time we would see them, they'd have a different question, or they would start to think about the business model of what we were doing a little differently, or think about what we needed to build a little differently. So it sort of gives people time to absorb. and make this part of the whole process.
To run high-impact experiments, identify your riskiest assumptions, and determine the best way to test those assumptions. Then, share the learnings with internal stakeholders and use those learnings to make better product decisions. Next up is the benchmark. Let's hear how Holly reflects on the next series of questions we ask all interviewees to ask themselves.
What's the best way to learn more about experimentation? I would say read Jeff Patton or attend one of his workshops. He gives you a lot of great, tangible, get-started techniques. How do I get out of the office, or what's my favorite customer development tactic? I do a lot of remote interviews because I have a lot of clients that have a global footprint or at least a national footprint. I've done a lot of recruiting through userinterviews.com or usertesting.com. I've also done sort of homegrown recruiting as well, whether it's emailing people who've expressed interest or who are on a customer list, or going out and looking for them in a forum and then asking them if they'll spend time talking to me, and then do a Google Hangout or a Zoom or something and just talk to them face to face. What am I reading or listening to right now? At any given time, I'm usually reading like one personal book and one professional book. So on the personal side, I really like sci-fi, and I've been reading the latest Christine Catherine Rusch novella, which was in Asimov's. It's called The Runabout. I love Christine Catherine Rusch because she does mystery and sci-fi together. And then on the professional side, I've been reading Sense and Respond by Jeff Gothelf and Josh Seedon. Saw them speak at Lean Startup New York, and was eager to get my hands on their book and hear about how they talk about why companies that aren't necessarily in the tech business need to learn how the tech business works. What's a new product I've been using outside of work? I just started using the Amazon Echo Dot. Got it installed about 4 days ago, and I have already used it to purchase things because I have small kids at home, and every time I take out my phone to order something, my kids can tell I'm on my phone. So I thought, if I get the Amazon Echo, I'll be able to just ask Alexa to order it, and I won't have to take my phone out, and I won't forget that I needed, more diapers.
Listeners can connect with Holly on Twitter and Medium at H2RProductSci and visit her website at h2rproductscience.com. That's our show. Until next time, this is Mike Fishbein from Alpha. If you enjoy the show, I encourage you to go beyond iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud and subscribe on our website, thisisproductmanagement.com. Every Monday, you'll get an email from me with the latest episode, exclusive product management resources, discounts to conferences, and opportunities to ask future guests a question that will be aired on the show. Visit thisisproductmanagement.com to subscribe.